All right, so last week, the week before, okay, so we looked into the Septuagint, which covered Esther's prayers before she went to go see King Xerxes. And of course, to approach the king unbidden is a death sentence unless the king says, okay, you won't die. But if the king does nothing, it's a death sentence because it's a practice meant to ensure that no one approaches to kill him. So it's not crazy because stuff like that happens. And if you remember earlier, there was a plot among some of the eunuchs to kill Xerxes. Now, I don't know what they were thinking after he was gone. I mean, you have to have some other leader you want to put in place. Otherwise, you'll just have chaos, right? So you want to quickly replace the leader so that everything keeps running smoothly. But, So Esther approached the king, and he was quite pleased, and she invited the king and Haman to a feast or a dinner with lots of wine. And what do you want, Esther? And I'll give it up to you up to half the kingdom, which is really meaning if it's within my power to grant it, I will. And she says, well, let's have a feast, another meet and greet, another feast tomorrow, and then I'll tell you. So that's where we're going to find ourselves at this second feast. Of course, what do we know about Haman, right? If you were to gauge his personality based on what we've read, is Haman a humble guy? Unless the word for humble has changed its meaning, he's quite arrogant, right? And I would even say narcissistic. And he has an inflated view of himself, his importance and everything else, which narcissists often do. So, and he may even, I'm making a leap here, he may even have like a bit of a psychopathic kind of personality. I'm just taking a guess here. I wouldn't say there's enough in Esther to give us that clue, but there are enough warning signs to go, wow, this guy's kind of self-serving, and yet he wants to look like. He's the type of guy that the boss you work for that you do, and he will try, and he may end up weaseling to claim the credit for something, others do. And that seems to be the case because after the eunuch plot to foil to kill the king was foiled, who ends up becoming his right-hand man? Haman does. And yet, who was the one who actually uncovered the plot? Mordecai. Mordecai did, and he told Esther, right? So, and you put two and two together, you're like, oh, well, you can't prove it, but the most logical conclusion is somehow he was able to claim credit or part credit for saving the king's life. Maybe part credit. And so now he's his right-hand man. Okay, and what edict did he basically send out empire-wide that he wants to do, which is part of the underlying situation in the text of Esther? He wants to get rid of the Jews. Okay, and so he has this hatred for the Jews, which is really being kind of an ancestral hatred that anyways, his ethnicity has kind of had. Okay, so that's kind of what has happened so far in the book. Let's turn to Esther chapter 5. So today we'll only be looking at the Hebrew text. If there's a couple things the Septuagint adds that gives information, we'll look at those. But we won't cover any additions that the Septuagint has. Okay, Esther chapter 5. Let's look at verse 9. We'll just look at the first half. Why? Because I want to start slow. And Haman went out that day. That's the day that the first party took place that Esther invited Haman and the king to. And Haman went out that day joyful and glad of heart. Okay? Well, glad of heart is really a way of politely saying that he's drunk or giddy, right? Tipsy. So tov lev, and that's the same phrase which is used to that describe the king in chapter 1. that the king was merry with wine, is how it's translated in the ESV. Before summoning Vashti, of course, we know what happened there. So we're going to find the text of Esther is using a lot of terms which were used earlier, which gives connections. Okay, and also, shows connections and also the irony that will later take place. Okay, so what is Haman's state of mind as he leaves the banquet? Well, let's remove the alcohol. He's happy because he thinks, why does he thinks it has to do with him? That's why, right? He knows Esther kind of, so he thinks, Esther's going to kind of like laud how great I am tomorrow. And so he's just like, woo, even Esther is singing my praises. Of course, he doesn't know Esther's Jewish. And at this point, neither does the king. Okay? So why do you think he would be giddy? For that very reason. Okay? Also, there's alcohol involved, right? And so let's look at verse 9b, because now you have Haman is happy, 9b. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he neither rose nor trembled before him, he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. Okay, so Mordecai's still kind of doing his thing, blowing Haman off. And he really shouldn't be doing that, but he is. Okay, and each time it happens, Mordecai is just angrier and angrier. But check this out, okay? Because last time Esther kind of mentions this, which kind of triggered this whole thing of Mordecai wanting to kill all the Jews. He was angry at Mordecai because Mordecai didn't do what? See? So earlier, Haman became enraged at Mordecai because he remained standing and didn't bow. This time, it's because Mordecai doesn't stand. Wait a minute, you're mad because last time I was standing and didn't bow, and now you're angry because I didn't stand? What does this kind of tell you? Yeah, it doesn't matter what he does. Mordecai could laugh. That God has a hideous laugh. He can breathe through his nose. He's breathing too heavily. Or it doesn't matter what he does now. It will cause Mordecai to be angry. Okay? So, and this, it's like, well, you're angry for the exact opposite thing that you were angry, right? That you were angry at him before. Yeah? So this kind of lets us know that no matter what, he hates Mordecai. And he's looking forward to the day when Mordecai and all his other Jews are gone. Of course, he's going to be involved in collecting, the wealth that they have. And he's going to pay off the bribe, if you want to use that term, to the emperor. And he'll be the second richest man in the kingdom, no doubt. Okay? So, that's all happened after the first party. Let's look at verses 10 through 13. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. You'll get your comeuppance, old Mordecai, right? And he sent and brought his friends and his wife Zeresh. And Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king had honored him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and the servants of the king. Oh, right? I mean, he's talking to his inner circle. Does he need to boast to them? I mean, Then Haman said, even Queen Esther, let no one but me come with the king to the feast she prepared. And tomorrow also I am invited by her together with the king. Yet all this is worth nothing to me so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. So as arrogant and, inflated and puffed up he is about himself, he's saying his anger, his hatred against Mordecai is greater. And so he says, as long as I see Mordecai, it's got to be squashing the other emotions in me. So he can't wait for the planned day when Mordecai is gone. right? Yeah. So, and of course, how does he interpret all the stuff Esther's doing? Well, I'm the greatest, right? So, yeah. So it's kind of like, I remember when I was a kid, do you remember like Muhammad Ali, and he would talk and all this other stuff? And he would talk a lot of stuff, but usually he would talk, but he would be the greatest, right? Until Joe Frazier beat him up in Africa or something. And it was really bad, that fight. And so after that, he wasn't the greatest. But I kind of felt good because I thought, that guy, he's just such a blabbermouth, boasting and, But it's different if you talk and don't, and you don't really have substance behind what you're saying. Okay, and so I'm thinking Mordecai has such a high view of himself that probably over time, if you've met similar people, when they recount their deeds kind of get larger and larger. So, unless I've just had a weird experience with people, I don't know. And the splendor of his riches, that's the same term that was used earlier. When King Xerxes was kind of doing that for the people, the people who manage the different provinces in the empire. So we're getting to kind of see these things, the same word usage and same phraseology, that Mordecai is really doing the same stuff as the king. So this is kind of giving us a clue how Mordecai views himself. He sees himself as equal to the emperor, to the king. But of course, he has to restrain himself because he's not. But that's how he sees himself. And so you have these little bits of the text which give us these clues. It's pretty, it's actually very, very good writing, that it includes these, and it includes this in this way. Okay, so it's just not recounting facts, but it's doing it in a specific way, so we can understand more. And so we're getting insight into Mordecai. I'll say Mordecai's pathology, if we want to do that. Okay? Oh, not Mordecai, I'm sorry. Haman's pathology. I'm sorry if I referred to Mordecai, yeah. So Mordecai is, yeah. Okay? So let's continue and see what he's thinking and what he's going to do, because he still plans to carry out the edict. That is the emperor's edict, though how fully the emperor agrees with the edict in theory because of the way that Haman described it. Okay, so let's read verses 14 and 15. And let's see. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, Let a gallows 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged upon it. So the gallows may be on a hill, which is, to elevate it, but whatever. It's this really high, prominent, public gallows. We'll get to what they mean by hanged upon it. Then go joyfully to the king to the feast. This idea pleased Haman. Of course it did, right? And he had the gallows made. Why? Who does he think's going to be on the gallows? Mordecai, of course. When we think of gallows, we think of kind of like, the rope and the hangman's noose, and you kick out the stool the guy's standing on, or you have a trap, whatever, and boom, the guy falls, his neck snaps, and he dangles a little bit, and he dies. That's not what's happening here. What the Persian Empire would do is they would have a pike, and of course, the person would be impaled on the pike, and just there until he died. And as gruesome as this is, executioners, right? The executioner who was good would impale someone, but it wouldn't damage the heart. So, and it would make sure that at least one lung would work. So it would go through the person, and so the person would be there in agony for a while before he died. See? So and so that's kind of what he's envisioning for Mordecai. Mordecai's going to be stuck on a pike, and of course he'll be hanging in the sense that, his feet won't be touching the platform. Okay, so and that was the Roman equivalent. That was the Persian equivalent of the crucifixion, right? Whatever that guy did, don't do it. Oh, I'm going to do whatever he did because no one wants that. No one wants that as a way to die, right? So he leaves happy because he's going, yeah, oh, Mordecai, you're going to get it for those times you disrespected me, right? So he's just kind of seething with this kind of controlled anger, but he's going to let it all out in a little bit if he can. Okay? So that's the stage that's now set. Well, the next day hasn't yet happened, has it? So let's see what's going to happen on the next day. But we're not there yet because it's now evening and night. And let's see what happens during this time, because is this all going to turn around? On that night, the king could not sleep. And he gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold and who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus or King Xerxes. And the king said, "What honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" The king's young men who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." Okay, so could not sleep. So we want to like listen to the Hebrew. So the Hebrew really says that sleep fled from the king or deserted the king, which implies, because that's not the normal way to describe insomnia. So it implies that someone or something caused the king to be unable to sleep. Implication: God's providence. Now, it's too early right now to say, oh, that's God's providence. But as the story unfolds, or as the accounts kind of unwind, God was definitely somehow doing this. Now, the Greek Septuagint takes the implication and just states it outright. Okay, it says the Lord took sleep from the king. So the Septuagint, in its translation, is a little more. It just connects the dots to the inference that the Hebrew text made. So when the king can't sleep, what does he do? Well, bring out the book, and of course it's being read to him. Now we're going to find out that this was something that went on a while. It just says he learns of Mordecai, but this probably went on for several hours, because let's see what happens next. And of course, the Hebrew word for read, it implies, it's the Nephal form, which, whatever. But it implies that it's a kind of a deep, sort of extensive, not just glance over, okay, even though he's being read to, okay. So he's meeting it. There's a deeper connection. He's pondering this. He's listening intently. He can't sleep, and it's not only letting him know the things that he's accomplished, but also if he's overlooked anyone, okay? Because part of the way that the empire runs is that if somebody does something that benefits the empire, that person is rewarded, which is what you want. You want bad punished, and you want good rewarded. And when that happens, you have a better running empire. And so, and any good leader will know this, okay? So Xerxes hears of this oversight, right? And then he says, well, what honor and distinction? Okay, that's distinction is really kind of what honor or greatness did I bestow on Mordecai? Or that's also the word for promotion. Okay, so he's saying, hey, I should have promoted him. I should have rewarded him, and I did nothing? Xerxes is going to correct this oversight, because especially if it involved saving his life. Now, why it was overlooked the first time, who knows? But it definitely was an oversight, okay? And somehow Haman got rewarded instead of Mordecai. Go figure. Okay? So let's look at verses 4 through 6 now, okay? And the king said, "Who is in the court?" Okay, who is in the court? Do you think this is like some weird midnight visitor who shows up unannounced? No. It's now morning. And so the court is now filling up with people who are there to do their duties. Okay? That's how we know that this lasted a while. Okay? The king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for him. So what? He's thinking, well, I want to kill Mordecai first before I get around to all the other Jews. Right? And the king's young men told him, "Haman is there, standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." Right? Even he's not allowed to approach the king unbidden. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, "What should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor?" Oh, man. Okay. And Haman said to himself, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me?" Isn't he full of himself? I mean, it's almost as if, wow, my goodness. Okay. So he discovers Haman is in the court. And what counsel does the king want from him? He says, well, hey, I want to honor somebody. You're my right-hand man. What should I do? Of course, Haman says, oh, well, the king wants to honor me. Who else would he want to honor? Hello? You're not the only guy in the empire who has done something good. My goodness. Oh, well, okay. So, but when Mordecai answers, the writing in the text is masterful, because when the king asks Esther, what does she want, and she starts to speak, and then she hesitates because she's fearful, like, ooh, what could happen? And then she regains her confidence and presses on. Mordecai does the same thing. He has an incomplete sentence and stops, but he's not fearful or hesitating. I mean, he's so full of himself that he's thinking, oh, who the king, of course the king wants to honor me. Who else would he honor? So this kind of shows that he's savoring the moment. He's in his head like, oh man, just off in fantasy land. Wow, so you can kind of see the same sort of thing, but one is, fearful and yet still courageous to do what needs to be done, and Haman is just whatever, just thinking, oh. And so what he's going to tell the king is going to be totally outlandish and absurd. I mean, but since it's for him, he doesn't think it's outlandish and absurd. So we'll have to hear that. But so let's hear the next few verses, because he'll describe what he thinks should take place for the man whom the king honors. Okay? And then so where do we stop? Okay. Oh yeah, so 7 through 9, right? Okay. And then, so here we go. And Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought. Now, what he's kind of saying here is these are some of Xerxes' robes, which, he's going to get like special power from wearing the king's robes. There's that sort of mystical kind of magical thing. And there's no way that the king would allow this. But that's what he's saying. But of course he's saying, well, of course I'm worthy of this. So, we wouldn't just get this in English, but we would, just the absurdity of it, there's no way that he would allow such nonsense. So let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn. So, it's like, okay, well, you can touch the king's robe or something, but not wear them. I mean, can you see the absurdity of this? You only have one emperor, and no one should be wearing his royal garb. So it'll be probably an outer garment that's not, in and of itself, indicative of his kingly power, but still the emperors, still the kings, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Not him, he's thinking somebody else, right? Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Oh, wow. I mean, can you have a more arrogant man who wants to wear the trappings of the emperor to be honored? He sees himself as the emperor's equal. But of course, out of self-preservation, he doesn't voice it. But, my goodness, wow. I think this guy needs psychological help. So there we have it, okay? This just totally outlandish and inflated, and the emperor should say no. But he's thinking of Mordecai, and Mordecai saved my life, and I overlooked it. And if he hadn't intervened, I would be dead. So he's probably willing to kind of do stuff that he normally would not do otherwise, okay? Because of what Mordecai did and the result of it, okay? So he's ashamed, the emperor's ashamed that he overlook, that somehow he missed rewarding Mordecai for saving his life, okay? So let's continue on and see what happens, okay? So, I mean, the king's going to have to let the cat out of the bag that, he wants to honor Mordecai. Then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robes and horse as you have said, and do so to Mordecai, the Jew. Wow. He knows Mordecai is Jewish, but this kind of gives us insight, right? Who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned. Oh man, talk about craziness and irony. And so Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai and led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Whoa, talk about rubbing salt in the wound, at least metaphorically, right? Ho, ho. So here he thought he was going to be the one, right? And he was going to be beneath Mordecai's feet in the sense of what? Seeing him on a pike. Because he went there saying, okay, I'm going to jump the gun here and I want to see Mordecai dead. And yet, complete reversal. Okay? So now he's beneath Mordecai, but Mordecai is being honored above him. Well, that doesn't mean he's going to be the king's right-hand man. There's no implication of that in the text. But he really wants to honor him for saving his life. And he's just doing what Haman suggested, which was crazy and over the top. Okay? So, considering how Haman is, you can't live in fantasy land after this happens, right? Whatever fantasy world you've constructed, it's going to be crumbling pretty fast, right? Okay. Well, let's look at verses 12 and 13, okay? Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. And Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. Maybe they're looking back in history and they kind of know what happened between the Jews and he's an Agagite, so Or maybe, who knows? But that's basically saying, look, if he's honored in this way, there's no way that you're going to be able to do what you want to do. Not happening. Okay? And so the thing is, when he says Mordecai the Jew, what does that mean about the edict that is the emperor, officially the emperor's, even though it's really Haman's? He knows that there are these people described by Haman who really don't follow their rules, and so, they're kind of harmful to the unity of the empire, and we need to get rid of them, right? He doesn't know that. He didn't mention the people. He just kind of described it, and if you're Jewish, you can read it and you go, ooh, that's looking pretty much like us. But the emperor, right? So, so he's not even aware that his decree is slated to kill all the Jews. So that kind of lets us know that he has too much confidence in Haman. So Haman is really good at deceiving that type of person, right? So Esther kind of has this charisma and aura, and people want to be around her, but she has kind of like a genuine sort of thing going on, whereas Haman is all deception and deceit, and what can I get from this? That's really all that he's concerned about. Okay, what does this do for me? And then he does and says what he needs to say to kind of achieve that, and now he's the second highest person in the empire. So he really does kind of have this ability to kind of influence and sway people to the bad. Okay, so he rushes home and he realizes, oh man, this is not good, and that's what his friends and wife tell him. Now the Hebrew text, before whom you have begun to fall, this is where the Septuagint adds to this verse. It ends a sentence with, because the living God is with him, referring to Mordecai. Okay, just like the Septuagint said, the Hebrew text implied that Xerxes didn't sleep by divine providence, whereas the Septuagint stated that directly. Okay, so on page 4, Haman began the day hoping to stand below and executed Mordecai on a pike. Instead, he spends his day below the feet of Mordecai, who rides in honor on the king's horse, calling out, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." So, yeah, not good if you're not good if you're Haman. Okay, are we ready for the next chapter? Chapter 6. So we're slated to go all the way through 6 and into 7, but we'll see if we get that far. Okay? 14, I think we will, because we're close to it, but yeah. Okay, so here's 14. While they were yet talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. Okay, what does this tell us? The king's eunuchs come to retrieve Haman. So Haman didn't make the appointment time because he's distraught. He's not his usual self. He's lost his bearings. And so the eunuchs have to retrieve him and bring him to this dinner, this feast that Esther has prepared for the king and Haman. This is the first time where we see Haman really totally lost, outside of his element, and not thinking that he's in full control. Okay? So Haman knows things are unraveling, and he doesn't yet know how to fix it. Okay? He's going to think, oh man, how can I wiggle my way out of this one? Right? So, okay. So next, it's going to be the feast. Okay, so that's chapter 7. Let's look at verses 1 and 2. So the king and Haman went in to feast with Queen Esther, and on the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said to Esther, "What is your wish, Queen Esther?" See, he's using formal titles. He's honoring her, right? It shall be granted you. What is your request? Even to half of my kingdom, it shall be fulfilled. Okay, earlier the king said that, and Haman thought, whatever, right? Now the king says this, and what do you think Haman's doing? He might need to clean out his pants, is what he might need to do, right? He's like, oh! Because if the emperor is able to do it, he's going to grant it. And he doesn't know Esther is Jewish, but he feels completely out of control, and he must have butterflies in his stomach, full of anxiety. Maybe, he's looking like pallid. Maybe he's pale, and who knows, but it is not good. And internally, he's panicking a bit, okay, because his house of cards is beginning to fall. Okay, all right. So let's look at verse 3 then. Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor in your sight." Now, remember how the text of Esther kind of referred to Esther having one favor? But look how she speaks, right? If I have found favor. So she speaks much more humbly, though, when it comes to actually receiving favor, because of what she accomplishes, her personality, all the stuff about her. She wins favor, not finds favor. But she's humble here. If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request. The king's probably thinking, what? What craziness are you talking about here, Esther? Because he has no clue, right? I mean, he knows about the edict, but he hasn't put the pieces together yet. And he's like, what do you mean your life is at risk, Esther? You're my queen. There's no way anything's going to happen to you unless I say so. Okay? So there you have it, right? So Esther addresses the king very, very humbly and respectfully. So on the bottom of page 4, we can kind of see the how this happens. So we can see how masterful Esther is. Okay, because let's take a look at how King Xerxes first speaks, and then let's see how Esther speaks. So we can see the same use of words, the same pattern, okay? And by doing this, I mean, you could do this in mockery, but the king knows that she's doing this out of respect, okay? And she approaches him in a more humble way than she has to. She can't be disrespectful, but she's approaching him in a more humble way than she needs to. The total opposite of Vashti. What do you mean? I'm not going to your party, dude. Right? I have my own one going on. So, King Xerxes, what is your wish? See the Hebrew word? Okay. And it shall be granted you. And what is your request? So, right? And so, so wish, shalah, Hebrew, Natan. That's where we get the word Nathan. It means gift or something along those lines. And then request, bakasha. Okay, so let my life be granted. In other words, gift me my life. And, Xerxes has to be scratching his head. For me, as my wish, he used the same term. What is your wish? This is my wish, shalah. Okay, and my people for my request, bakasha. Okay, so she's using the same pattern, going from smaller to larger, and even using some of the same words. Okay, so she's being respectful and following his lead, and her response shows this. Okay, so it's masterful. Wow, man, whew. You can see why she's queen. Okay, let's look at verse 4. Okay? For we have been sold, referring to her people. We have, what? What do you mean? What are your people, slaves? Right? I and my people, to be destroyed. See, now she's quoting the edict. The edict is full of kind of, a lot of infinitives are used in it, and so she's doing that. So for we have, and the ESV does a good job of using infinitive. So we kind of know that that's what she's doing. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent. For our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king. Kind of hard to translate because her words are so skillful that it kind of has a double meaning here. Okay, she's saying, well, it wouldn't even really be worth mentioning. So to trouble you. And yet the last phrase that she says also is that what? The implication is that the king's life is in trouble. And so the ESV does kind of bring that aspect out. So if you can kind of catch that, right? So if I can find it, but okay, and let King. Well, anyways, so well, I must have missed it somewhere. But anyways, so it's because I was looking in the wrong verse. Okay, so let's look at verse 4 in chapter 7, and let's kind of look at the tail end. For our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king. What do you mean, the loss to the king? It could also imply the king's loss, that his life could be in danger. And so that's part of the reason why she must bring this up. Okay, so it's not only for her and her people, okay? But it's greater than that. If it were only me and my people, okay, but your life may be at risk. Now, if Esther's kind of doing this in kind of her kind of polite language that's going, that she's using, what? I didn't even know that your life was right. But now he knows, okay. So this is the edict which did not mention the Jews. Okay. But, so Xerxes learns something. Okay. And he learns that Esther is now Jewish. Haman learns that Esther is Jewish. So right now, he will need his pants cleaned. Okay. Whereas before, maybe not. Okay. Oh boy. And that she's stating in a polite way that the king's life may be at risk. And so she must mention the death of herself and her people, because the king will be harmed by this. Okay? Oh boy. So, yeah. And so the Septuagint reveals the enemy is within the king's inner circle. See, so the Septuagint again adds a little bit more. So the Septuagint looks at the Hebrew text and goes, okay, well, this is the implication, and just fills in the blanks. So, I mean, it leaves out some of the masterful use of rhetoric and language that is happening. And you see this and you go, oh, wow. Oh, man, the way Esther has done this, it's just, whoa. There's no way Haman could recover from this. Oh, man. She's just, okay. So let's look at verse 5, okay. Then King Xerxes said to Queen Esther, who is he? See, he recognizes who's the one who's threatening my life, who's putting my life at risk. He could read, he hears her kind of polite, courtly language, but he knows that no doubt Esther is politely saying, your life is at risk, not just the life of me and my people. Okay? And where is he who has dared? Okay? And dared, yeah, but it's literally filled inner self, which go, what? In other words, who acted in such a way to benefit himself, but harm the empire. See, I mean, Xerxes will do lots of stuff and in his self-interest, but he won't do anything that he deliberately believes will harm the empire, because that will harm himself. That will harm, one of his sons who will become king. So, and he says, well, who? He still doesn't know that Haman's at the root of all this. She could say, well, it's you, King Xerxes, right? It could be like a David or a Samuel and David moment, like you're the one who, using the sheep thing or whatever, but no. So, yeah, that technically would be true, but who's at the who's at the core of this? Well, it's Haman. He put too much trust in Haman. Like, you run all the everyday stuff, okay? Which is okay if you have a really good person who does that, but okay. So let's read with the next verse, okay? Because it's not looking good for Haman. Bad days are a-coming. Okay. So, and Esther said, a foe and enemy, this wicked Haman. Well, we'll stop there because let's check out the Hebrew, because now her response is no longer polite, it's boom. Just, it's like dropping the other shoe, right? So, and it's kind of a short, staccato-ish kind of answer. A man, hateful and hostile, this wicked Haman. So she doesn't say where he is, but she no doubt points her hand to him. Wow. Okay, so he'll have to beg for mercy. Just, please don't kill me slowly. That will take days. Don't put me on the pike. Because, well, okay. So, Haman's being exposed to be a self-serving, power-hungry guy who's only out for himself, but projects that he's for the emperor. He's doing what's best, but he's not. Okay? So, if you don't have good people around you and you're the head guy, that's bad. So you would hope that at least if you're not the smartest guy in the world, or you have Alzheimer's, you would get wise and smart people to do stuff well, which doesn't always happen. And I'll stop there. Okay, then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. Should he not be terrified? He's being exposed as basically a fraud. A guy who's doing everything to serve the emperor for the interest of the empire. But he's not. Now the thing is, probably people underneath him know what a fraud Haman is. But Xerxes is not going to know unless he happens to catch, Haman treating his underlings poorly. Okay. Or he gets exposed. And so Esther exposes him. And, she's probably the only person who can. Because considering he's the king's right-hand man, well, sure, like I'm going to expose Haman? No, it would take about 50 people, right? To have enough sway to go, I guess he really is bad if you can get 50 people who all say the same thing about all this stuff. But she could do this. But even she had to do it very carefully. And she did. Okay? So, we'll stop here and we'll see what happens. But I think Haman's going to have to wash his shorts at a minimum. So, because this is not good. So all the stuff that he has done, he's exposed. Okay? So, and the text of Esther is, rhetorically, it is so masterful because we can see these connections on how, with the words on how Haman sees and the same words are being used to describe himself that the king used earlier, which gives us insight as to who Haman thinks he is, but he's not going to end up like the emperor. See, that's going to be the flip side. So he's going to end up like Vashti, except worse. Way worse. Because as far as we know, Vashti was banished, but wasn't put on the pike. So right now he's thinking, okay, is there anything I can do? Is there anything I can do to not be put on the gallows, which he had built, which you can't hide. Well, where did this come from? King, I brought some wood in, somehow it just miraculously put itself together. Right? So, yeah. Any thoughts or questions? Okay, next week we'll finish up because it's interesting. So there's still a lot more in the book of Esther, even though I will let the cat out of the bag that Mordecai is going to have his comeuppance and won't be good for him. Oh, excuse me, Haman, not Mordecai. Mordecai, things will go well. Haman, badly. Okay? Let's pray, shall we? Heavenly Father, wow, there's so much in the text of Esther, and I hope we can glean so many good bits because we can get so much about how Esther really was the right person at the right time, whom you used to save your people, through whom the world's Messiah came. Thank you for letting us know this bit of Israelite history and how Esther played such a wondrous part, and how you could use people, me, folks in our congregation, to work your will, even when, well, we may think we're no big deal and, nothing huge or magnificent may come from how you use us, but who is to say, as you continue to use us in our little parts of the world to help be the face of Christ to others. May this always be so. In our Savior's name we pray. Amen.